Hello, my name is Claire, and this is the story of how my perfect life was surgically removed without my consent. I came out of anesthesia to the hushed, urgent tones of voices that weren't meant for me to hear. A man's voice, weary and deep, said, "The appendectomy is done, but that second part, the paperwork feels thin." A woman's younger voice replied, a nervous tremor in it. "He insisted, doctor. Said it was all discussed." Then the man's voice, a chilling whisper that cut through the fog in my mind. "I know. But we weren't supposed to do this. Not like this." That whisper was the first crack in the beautiful facade of my life. Before that moment, my world was a masterpiece of comfortable predictability. I was 32, married for 6 wonderful years to my husband, Thomas. The morning I went in for a routine appendectomy, I'd kissed him goodbye at the hospital entrance, my only concerns being the sting of an IV and the legendary awfulness of hospital food. I imagined being home by nightfall, curled up on our plush sofa with Thomas, recounting the day's minor dramas. But when I woke up, something was profoundly wrong. It wasn't just the expected soreness from the appendectomy. There was a deeper, more invasive ache in my pelvic region, a pain that had no business being there. The young nurse adjusting my IV drip, the one whose voice I'd heard in my days, kept darting nervous glances at the door. I realized then that while I was unconscious, a decision had been made about my body, my future, my very essence as a woman, and I was the last to know. What followed that chilling whisper would not only shatter my marriage, but would also expose a rot in the medical community and forge me into a force of vengeance I never knew I could become. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing, but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. The morning of the surgery began like any other. Sunlight streamed through the linen curtains of our Chicago apartment, painting soft stripes across our king-sized bed. I remember watching Thomas as he slept, his dark hair a mess against the white pillowcase, and feeling a familiar flutter in my chest. We'd been together for 9 years, and his smile still felt like coming home. The alarm buzzed, and he silenced it with a practiced swipe of his hand. "Coffee?" he mumbled, already swinging his legs out of bed. It was our ritual. He handled the coffee. I made the bed. Our life was a series of these comfortable, interlocking routines. He was a successful financial consultant, a man who could make numbers sing. I was a manuscript editor for a New York publishing house, working remotely from our second bedroom, a sanctuary filled with books and the quiet hum of my laptop. "Make it strong," I called out. "I've got a beast of a manuscript to tame today." "You always have a beast," he laughed from the kitchen, the sound rich and warm. Now, the memory of that laugh makes my skin crawl. We were supposed to start trying for a baby. Well, I was ready. For the past year, Thomas had always found a reason for delay. A big promotion on the horizon, market volatility, a desire to pad our savings a little more. But last month, he'd finally relented. "After the holidays, I promise," he'd said, kissing my forehead, "we'll start our family." I had a secret folder bookmarked on my browser filled with names, nursery ideas, and articles on prenatal vitamins. The pain struck at 10:15 a.m. I was on a video call with an author discussing character arcs when a searing heat, like a red-hot poker, plunged into my lower right abdomen. The laptop slid from my grasp as I doubled over, a gasp tearing from my throat. The author's pixelated face looked on in concern, her voice a distant buzz. I somehow ended the call and crawled towards the bathroom, a wave of nausea washing over me. Appendicitis. The word surfaced through the fog of agony. My older sister had gone through it in college. She'd described this exact, unrelenting pain. "Thomas!" I cried out. He was in his office, on a conference call. I sent him a text, my fingers fumbling on the screen. "Something's wrong." "Hospital. Now." He found me on the cold tile of the bathroom floor. I'd never seen him move with such speed and purpose. He scooped me up, grabbed my purse and his keys, and practically carried me to our car in the garage below. In the blur of the emergency room, with its sterile smells and fluorescent glare, Thomas was my rock. He handled the insurance cards, the admission forms, and answered the triage nurse's questions while I writhed on a gurney. Everyone was so gentle. The phlebotomist who apologized before the needle stick, the ultrasound tech who warned me about the cold gel. They treated me like a person in pain. The ER doctor confirmed it. Acute appendicitis. "We need to get you into surgery today," he said calmly. "Good news is, we caught it early. It's a laparoscopic procedure, very straightforward." Thomas was right there holding my hand, asking the right questions. Recovery time, risks, post-op care. He was my protector, my advocate. I loved him for it. I trusted him with my life. In the pre-op room, an older nurse with kind eyes came in with a clipboard. "Just a few consent forms, honey," she said, her voice soft. She paused, frowning at her paperwork. "Looks like we just need to confirm both procedures." "We've already been over it with the doctor," Thomas interjected smoothly, his hand resting on my shoulder. "She's in a lot of pain. Is there any way we can expedite this?" The nurse looked from Thomas to me, her expression hesitant. "Of course. We just need her signature right here." "I'll help her," Thomas said, taking the pen and guiding my hand. The morphine they'd given me had turned the world into a warm, blurry soup. I scrawled something that looked vaguely like my name. My lips felt thick, clumsy. I tried to form a question. "What? Second?" "Shh, baby. Don't worry about a thing," Thomas murmured, kissing my forehead. "Just rest. I'll be right here when you wake up." As they wheeled me toward the operating room, the anesthesiologist's cheerful voice explained that he wanted me to count backward from 10. My mind was still stuck on that one fuzzy detail. Both procedures? What second procedure? 10, 9. The mask came down over my face, smelling of plastic and chemicals. What second? 8, 7. The world dissolved into blackness. Waking up was like swimming towards a distant light from the bottom of a deep, dark ocean. My throat was raw and scratchy from the breathing tube. The recovery room was dimly lit, the only sound the rhythmic, reassuring beep of the heart monitor next to my bed. I was groggy, disoriented, but alive. I tried to shift my weight, and a sharp, unfamiliar pain made me gasp. It wasn't just the small incisions for the appendectomy. My entire pelvic area throbbed with a deep, bruised ache. A young nurse with kind, tired eyes was checking my vitals. "Welcome back, Claire," she said softly. "Surgery went well. Dr. Anders will be by to see you soon." "It hurts," I managed to croak, my hand instinctively going to my lower abdomen. "Down here. Is that normal?" Her hand stilled on the blood pressure cuff. A flicker of something Discomfort, maybe pity, crossed her face before she smoothed it into a professional mask. She glanced over her shoulder towards the bustling hallway, then back at me. "There was a second procedure performed, ma'am." The fog in my brain began to clear, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. "What? What second procedure? Nobody said anything about a second procedure." She pulled the thin curtain around my bed, creating a small, confidential space. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Your husband, Mr. Morrison, authorized it. He signed the consent forms. It was a gynecological procedure. Check count, 2011, Kelime." The beeping of the heart monitor sped up, a frantic soundtrack to my rising panic. "Gynecological? What are you talking about? Where is Thomas? I need to speak to my husband." "Ma'am, please try to stay calm. It will be better for your recovery." "Don't tell me to stay calm." My voice was raw, cracking with disbelief. My hand fumbled for my phone on the bedside table, knocking over a plastic cup of water. It rang and rang, finally going to his voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Thomas. Leave a message." His cheerful, confident voice felt like a slap in the face. "I have a right to know what was done to my body," I said to the nurse, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. She bit her lip, clearly conflicted. "I can't discuss the specifics without the surgeon present. It's hospital policy. I could lose my job." She looked at my desperate face, and her resolve seemed to crumble. "But I will page Dr. Anders and tell him it's urgent. You deserve an explanation from him." The hour I waited for Dr. Anders was the longest of my life. I called Thomas 5 more times, each call unanswered. I texted my best friend Julie, but the words wouldn't form. Something's wrong. They did something to me. How could I explain what I didn't even understand? Anders finally appeared, a tall, silver-haired man who radiated an aura of unshakable confidence that I found instantly infuriating. He pulled up a stool, his expression one of a paternalistic concern. "Mrs. Morrison, I hear you're feeling some discomfort. That's perfectly normal." "What did you do to me?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. "What was the second procedure?" He cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. "Your husband had expressed some long-standing concerns. While we were performing the appendectomy, we took the opportunity to address another issue. It's all fully documented, with the proper consent forms signed on your behalf." "What? Issue?" I bit out each word. He finally met my eyes, his tone matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. "A bilateral tubal ligation." The room spun. I gripped the cold metal bed rails to anchor myself. The words didn't make sense. Tubal ligation, sterilization. "Your husband explained that you had both decided on this course of action months ago, but that you were experiencing significant anxiety about undergoing a separate surgery. He felt it would be an act of kindness to have it done while you were already under anesthesia, sparing you the additional stress." "You sterilized me?" The words were a choked whisper. "It's a very common procedure, Mrs. Morrison," he said, completely missing the point. "And should you change your minds, IVF is always an option." "Get out!" The words erupted from my chest, a guttural roar of pure rage. "Get out!" He stood, looking mildly offended by my lack of gratitude. "I understand you're emotional, but I assure you everything was done by the book. Your husband had medical power of attorney." "Get out!" After he left, I lay shaking, the sterile scent of the hospital suddenly suffocating. A few minutes later, the young nurse, Kelsey, slipped back behind the curtain. Her face was full of sympathy. Without a word, she handed me a folded piece of paper. "I printed this from your file. I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered. "But you deserve to see it." It was a copy of the consent form. There, under the description for the appendectomy, was another line: "Bilateral tubal ligation via laparoscopic approach." And below it, Thomas's signature, bold, clear, and confident. He hadn't just consented, he had planned this. Thomas arrived the next morning carrying a bouquet of white lilies, my favorite. He was smiling that easy, charming smile that had once melted my heart. Now it just looked predatory. He leaned down to kiss my forehead, but I flinched away. He set the flowers on the nightstand, his smile faltering for just a second. "Hey, how are you feeling?" he asked, his voice a perfect imitation of a concerned husband. "What did you do, Thomas?" My voice was flat, devoid of the tears I'd shed all night. There was only a cold, hollow space where my trust in him used to be. "What do you mean, honey? I got held up in meetings all day yesterday. I'm so sorry. The Peterson deal is—" "The surgery," I cut him off. "The tubal ligation. What did you do?" He pulled the visitor's chair closer, his face morphing into a mask of deep concern. There was no surprise, no shock. He had rehearsed this. "Claire, sweetheart, you're still coming off the anesthesia. You're confused." "I am not confused." I held up the copy of the consent form Kelsey had given me. "You signed this. You authorized them to sterilize me." He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture I once found endearing. Now it just looked theatrical. "Claire, we've talked about this. You were terrified of childbirth. Remember a few weeks ago when your sister Sarah brought baby Leo over? You had a full-blown panic attack after they left. You told me you couldn't go through with it, that the thought of being pregnant filled you with dread." A cold denial washed over me. "That never happened. Sarah and Leo haven't visited in over a month. And I want a baby, Thomas. We were going to start trying, you promised." "Honey, you've been under so much pressure at work," he said, his voice taking on a soft, patronizing tone I now recognized he'd used on me for years. "You get emotional. You say things you don't mean. I was protecting you. I did what was best for us, for our future. Our future. You took away my future. You took away my choice." "I protected you from a choice you would have regretted," he said, his voice becoming firm, parental. "Children would change everything, Claire. Our lifestyle, your career, us. You know that, deep down. You're just feeling hormonal from the surgery." Hormonal. The word hung in the air, a stunningly perfect piece of misogynistic gaslighting. It was the moment the last shred of love I had for him died. "Get out," I said quietly. "Claire, don't be dramatic." "Get out!" I screamed, the sound tearing through my raw throat. He stood, adjusting his tie, always concerned with appearances. "Fine. I'll come back when you're ready to be rational." The moment the door closed behind him, I called Julie. She picked up on the first ring. "Finally! I was so worried. How are you? Did the surgery go okay?" The words tumbled out of me in a torrent of sobs and rage. The second procedure, the forged signature, Thomas's insane story about my panic attack. She listened in stunned silence. "That absolute bastard!" she finally hissed when I was done. "Claire, we were literally looking at nursery furniture on Pinterest last week. You sent me a list of baby names you liked. He's lying. He's trying to make you think you're insane." "I know," I whispered. "But he's so convincing." "You're not crazy," she said fiercely. "You're the sanest person I know. I'm leaving work now. I'm coming to get you. The hospital discharged me that afternoon. Julie drove me back to the apartment that no longer felt like home. Thomas wasn't there. We needed proof. Hard proof. While Julie made me tea, I sat on the couch, my body aching, and opened my laptop. My search history was a chronicle of my real desires: best prenatal vitamins, ovulation tracking apps, baby name meanings. I took screenshots of everything. Thomas's home office was his fortress. He always kept it locked when he wasn't home. I'd always respected his privacy. Now, that respect felt like an act of profound stupidity. "It's locked," I told Julie. "Where's the key?" "I have no idea. He's never given it to me." We searched the obvious places: the dish for loose change, the top of the door frame. Nothing. Then Julie let out a small gasp. She was standing in the hallway, holding our wedding photo. Taped to the back of the heavy silver frame was a small brass key. The irony was so bitter, it made me want to laugh. The office was neat and orderly, just like Thomas. But one filing cabinet drawer had a separate combination lock. "Try your anniversary," Julie suggested. 612. Nothing. His birthday? 0925. Nothing. I was about to give up when a distant memory surfaced. Early in our relationship, he'd told me his lucky number, a sequence he used for everything before our lives became a series of complex, unique passwords. 22743. The contents of the drawer felt cold to the touch, a secret history of his deception. There were printed articles on the benefits of a child-free lifestyle, brochures for vasectomies and tubal ligations, and a thick folder labeled contingencies. My stomach clenched. Inside that folder was an email chain that stole the air from my lungs. The emails, dated 3 months prior, were between Thomas and a Dr. Michael Brennan at a different hospital. Thomas had written, "I am inquiring about options for permanent birth control for my wife. She has expressed a desire to be child-free, but suffers from severe anxiety regarding medical procedures. Is it possible to perform a tubal ligation concurrently with another scheduled surgery to minimize her distress?" Dr. Brennan's reply was firm. "Under no circumstances could we perform such a procedure without the patient's explicit, direct, and fully informed consent, which includes a dedicated consultation and counseling session. To do otherwise would be a serious ethical and legal violation." Thomas had replied, "What if the patient is medically incapacitated? What if her husband, holding full medical power of attorney, makes the decision in her best interest?" Dr. Brennan never responded to that email. Thomas had been shopping for a doctor willing to break the rules. And at the bottom of the pile, I found a printed email exchange with Dr. Anders from Riverside Medical Center, our hospital. Dr. Anders had been more flexible. "I understand your concerns for your wife's well-being, Mr. Morrison," he'd written. "In complex emergency situations, decisions must sometimes be made expediently. If the proper consent forms were in place, it is hypothetically possible to address multiple issues in a single operation. It would, of course, require meticulous documentation." "This is a conspiracy," Julie breathed, reading over my shoulder. "He conspired with a doctor to assault you." I took photos of every single document with my phone. As I was sliding the folder back into place, my fingers brushed against something hard and smooth tucked into the back of the drawer. A small, black, unfamiliar smartphone. A burner phone. It was password protected, of course, but Thomas, for all his cunning, was a creature of habit. I punched in 2743. It unlocked. The screen lit up with a text message history that made me physically ill. The contact was saved simply as A. The most recent message was from the day of my surgery. A. Is it done? Thomas. Yes, she can't trap me now. A. When are you leaving her? Thomas. Soon. Just need the dust to settle. I scrolled up, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control the screen. The messages went back for more than a year. There were photos, intimate, smiling pictures of a woman I recognized. Amanda, a junior partner from Thomas's firm. I'd met her at the company holiday party last year. She'd been so friendly, complimenting my dress, asking about our plans. Kids are a career killer, she'd said, with a conspiratorial wink. You're smart to wait. I kept scrolling, a nauseous feeling rising in my throat. A message thread from 2 months ago felt like a punch to the gut. Thomas. She's getting obsessed with having a baby. It's becoming a real problem. Apin. So just leave her. Thomas. Can't yet. The prenup is ironclad. If we divorce now, she gets half of everything I've made since we got married. But there's a clause. A. A clause? Thomas. About children. If she is medically unable to conceive, the settlement is significantly smaller. A. You are a terrible man, Thomas Morrison. Thomas. I know. Isn't that why you love me? I bolted from the office, making it to the bathroom just in time to vomit into the toilet. The betrayal was so absolute, so layered, it was almost elegant in its cruelty. It wasn't about my supposed fear of childbirth. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about money. And another woman. He hadn't just taken my fertility. He'd done it to pave the way for a cheaper divorce and a new life with his mistress. Julie held my hair back, her face a mask of cold fury. When I was done, she helped me to the couch and handed me a glass of water. We're not just getting you a divorce lawyer, she said, her voice shaking with rage. We're getting you a prosecutor. We're going to burn him to the ground. That night I lay in our bed, my bed, I corrected myself, and stared at the ceiling, the incisions in my abdomen a throbbing reminder of the violation. Around 1 a.m., I heard his key in the lock. I feigned sleep as he moved through the apartment. I heard the soft click of his office door opening and closing. He was checking. Then the mattress dipped as he slid into bed beside me. He smelled faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine. I know you're awake, Claire, he whispered into the darkness. We need to put this behind us. You're going to see I did the right thing. You'll thank me one day. I remained perfectly still, my breath shallow, my body rigid with hate. He rolled over, and within minutes he was breathing the deep, even breaths of a man without a conscience. I waited for another hour, then slipped out of bed and went into his office. I took the burner phone and the file of documents. It was time to call a lawyer. The law firm of Chen and Associates was located on the 45th floor of a sleek glass tower overlooking Millennium Park. Julie had found her through a network of powerful women. Sarah Chen doesn't just handle divorces, Julie had told me. She dismantles empires. Sarah Chen was a petite woman in her early 40s with razor-sharp eyes and an air of coiled energy. She listened to my entire story without interruption, her expression unreadable. I handed her the file from Thomas's office and showed her the photos and screenshots on my phone. When I finished, she steepled her fingers and looked at me. This is the most flagrant case of medical battery, conspiracy, and spousal fraud I have ever seen, she said, her voice calm but laced with steel. The hospital's liability is catastrophic. And your husband has committed several felonies. We can prove it, but we need to be strategic. What do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah leaned forward. This is going to be the hardest part, Claire. Can you go home and pretend that you're starting to see his point of view? Can you play the part of the confused, emotional wife who is slowly coming around? We need him to feel safe. We need him to believe he's won. Men like Thomas get careless when they think they're in control. So I became an actress in the tragedy of my own marriage. I went home, and when Thomas returned from work, I offered a tearful apology for my outburst at the hospital. I was just so emotional and confused, I said, hating the taste of the words in my mouth. Maybe you were right. The relief on his face was sickening. He pulled me into a hug, stroking my hair. I knew you'd understand, baby. I knew you'd see reason. I did this for us. For the next week, I lived in a surreal nightmare. I cooked his favorite meals, listened to him talk about his day, and let him hold my hand as we watched movies. Every night, after he fell asleep, I would go to the guest room where I'd hidden the burner phone and email every new piece of evidence to Sarah. Every conversation we had, I documented from memory, typing out his patronizing words, his self-serving justifications. "I'm so glad you're finally seeing things clearly," he said one evening over a dinner I'd spent the entire afternoon preparing. "I knew this was for the best. We're free now, Claire. Think of all the traveling we can do, the life we can build without being tied down." I smiled, a perfect imitation of dawning realization. "I've been thinking about that," I said, my voice carefully modulated. "Maybe I was just caught up in what society expects, you know? The whole marriage then baby pipeline. Maybe this is what I really wanted all along." He beamed, his face alight with smug triumph. "That's my girl. See? I know you better than you know yourself sometimes." While he was in the shower, I went through the wallet he'd left on the dresser. Tucked behind his corporate credit card was a folded receipt. A payment of $15,000 made the day before my surgery. It wasn't to Riverside Medical Center. It was to a private LLC, Anders Medical Consulting. It was a bribe, a direct payment for his services. I snapped a photo and sent it to Sarah. Her reply was instantaneous. "Quid pro quo. We have him. It's time." The plan was set for Friday night. I told Thomas I wanted to cook a special dinner to celebrate our new beginning and moving forward. He was thrilled. He brought home a ridiculously expensive bottle of champagne. "To us," he said, raising his glass. "To our future." "To our future," I echoed, my smile feeling like a mask cracking apart. We ate in near silence. He talked about a potential promotion. I nodded and murmured encouragingly. After the main course, I stood up. "I have something I want to show you," I said, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. "A surprise." I led him into the living room, where I had queued up a video on our large-screen TV. It wasn't a movie. It was the security camera footage from the surgical floor of the hospital, which Sarah had obtained through a subpoena. The timestamp showed he was at the nurse's station while I was already in the operating room. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight with confusion. "Just watch." Sarah had paid to have the footage enhanced. It zoomed in on Thomas's hands as he took the clipboard from the nurse. It clearly showed him signing the consent form next to a signature line that was already filled in. My signature. A forgery he must have practiced and perfected. He paled, his champagne glass trembling in his hand. This is ridiculous. You probably signed it earlier and forgot in the haze of the painkillers." "Did I also forget this?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I pressed another button on the remote. His own voice filled the room, tinny and distorted, from the secret recording he'd made in Dr. Anders' office. "Just make sure she doesn't remember the specifics," his voice said. "Can you increase the anesthesia?" The color drained completely from his face. He looked at me, his eyes wide with dawning horror. He finally understood. He hadn't been talking to his confused, emotional wife. He'd been talking to his executioner. Just then, the doorbell rang, the sound perfectly timed. "You should probably get that," I said. Thomas moved toward the door, like a man in a trance. Standing on our doorstep was a professional-looking man in a suit who confirmed Thomas's identity and handed him a thick manila envelope. The process server. Thomas ripped it open, his hands shaking as his eyes scanned the first page. Lawsuit, fraud, conspiracy, medical battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, divorce petition. "You can't do this," he whispered, turning to me, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Claire, you're my wife. We're a team." "We were never a team," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as the evidence against him. "A team doesn't conspire to mutilate one of its members for financial gain. You had a business partner. Her name is Amanda. I have the texts." His face crumpled. The last bit of fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by pure animal panic. "This will ruin me." "Yes," I said, "it will." I turned and walked calmly toward our bedroom. He followed, his voice rising in desperation. "You're being hysterical. No one will believe you." "Will believe. I'll tell them you're having a mental breakdown, that you're unstable." I stopped at the bedroom door and turned to face him one last time. "They won't have to believe me, Thomas. They'll believe the forged signatures. They'll believe the recorded conversation with your doctor. They'll believe the receipt for the $15,000 bribe. They'll believe the texts where you discussed my medical inability to conceive as a way to screw me in our divorce." I stepped into the bedroom and closed the door in his face, turning the lock with a satisfying click. Through the heavy wood, I could hear him start to rage, his voice escalating from pleading to threatening. He pounded on the door, shouting my name, calling me a bitch, a liar. Then silence as he presumably retreated to his office to call his lawyer. I sat on the edge of the bed, the adrenaline finally starting to fade, leaving me trembling. The woman I had been just 2 weeks ago would have been hiding under the covers, sobbing. But that woman was gone, cut away on an operating table. In her place was someone I was just getting to know, someone forged in betrayal and tempered by rage. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah Chen. "He's been served. Hospital and Anders served simultaneously. Medical board complaint filed. Game on." The first counterattack came 3 days later. A sheriff's deputy knocked on my door and served me with an emergency restraining order. Thomas was claiming I was erratic and violent, that I had stolen privileged documents, and that he was in fear for his life. "The audacity of this man is almost impressive," Julie said, reading the papers over my shoulder. Sarah was less amused. "It's a classic narcissist's move. Darvo. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. He's trying to paint you as the crazy one before you can prove he's the criminal. It won't work." The hearing was my first time seeing him since that night. He sat across the courtroom looking haggard but defiant, his expensive lawyer at his side. His lawyer, a slick man named Richard Brennan, began. Your Honor, my client is the victim here. Mrs. Morrison has become unstable. She has fabricated an elaborate and defamatory conspiracy theory to ruin Mr. Morrison's reputation. When it was her turn, Sarah stood, a picture of calm confidence. Your Honor, with all due respect, what my client has fabricated is nothing compared to the signature Mr. Morrison fabricated on her surgical consent form. She placed a copy of the form on the projector. And if you have any doubts about Mr. Morrison's stability, I invite the court to listen to this. She played the recording from Dr. Anders' office. The courtroom was silent, held captive by Thomas's own voice plotting my sterilization. I watched his lawyer's face fall. I watched the judge's eyes narrow into slits. When it was over, the judge looked at Thomas with unconcealed disgust. Mr. Morrison, not only is your request for a restraining order denied, but I am also ordering you to vacate the marital residence immediately. Furthermore, I am forwarding this audio recording to the district attorney's office with a strong recommendation that they open a criminal investigation. Get out of my courtroom. Thomas stormed out, his face purple with rage. Sarah squeezed my arm. Round one, she whispered, to us. The story broke in the Chicago Tribune a week later. Financial executive accused of authorizing wife's secret sterilization. My phone exploded. The hospital issued a statement suspending Dr. Anders and launching an internal investigation. Thomas's firm placed him on indefinite administrative leave. His carefully constructed world was beginning to burn. Then I got a call from an unknown number. It was Kelsey, the nurse from the recovery room. "I'm not supposed to be talking to you," she said, her voice a nervous whisper. "But there's something you need to know. You're not the first one." We met at a dimly lit diner an hour outside the city. Kelsey slid into the booth, clutching a large coffee cup, her eyes darting around nervously. "Dr. Anders has a reputation," she began, her voice low. "He caters to a certain type of wealthy, powerful man, men who feel inconvenienced by their wives' desires." She told me about 3 other cases she knew of personally over the past 5 years. A woman who came in for gallbladder surgery and left without her uterus. Another who had a benign cyst removed and was also sterilized. Her husband claiming she was too emotionally fragile to consent herself. The hospital administration knew, Kelsey insisted. They buried the complaints, settled one quietly, and fired a nurse who pushed the issue too hard, citing a patient privacy violation. "They protect him because he brings in wealthy patients," she said bitterly. "But I made copies before they scrubbed the files." She slid a small flash drive across the slick tabletop. "Everything I have is on there. Be careful, Claire. These people protect their own." The contents of the drive were horrifying. Patient files, internal emails discussing managing the Anders situation, and the hushed-up complaint from the fired nurse. One of the women, after discovering what had been done to her, had taken her own life a year later. When I showed the drive to Sarah, her face hardened. "This is no longer just a divorce and a malpractice suit," she said, her voice like ice. "This is a criminal conspiracy and a class action lawsuit waiting to happen. We're going to take down the doctor, the husband, and the entire hospital." The discovery phase of the lawsuit was a brutal campaign. Sarah's team subpoenaed years of financial records. They found a pattern: large personal payments made to Dr. Anders' consulting firm from husbands whose wives were about to undergo unrelated surgeries under his care. They uncovered emails between hospital administrators weighing the financial benefits of keeping Anders against the potential liability of his practices. Armed with Kelsey's evidence, we found the other 2 living victims. One was too traumatized to join the lawsuit, but agreed to provide a sworn affidavit. The other, a woman named Maria, had divorced her husband but had been too broken and afraid to fight the hospital. My story gave her courage. Our case became a class action lawsuit. Thomas's deposition was a masterclass in narcissistic collapse. I watched via a video link from Sarah's office. He began calm and defiant, sticking to his story of the unstable wife. But under Sarah's relentless surgical questioning, he began to unravel. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah asked calmly, "did you ever, in plain English, tell your wife that you did not want to have children?" He hesitated. "We had discussions." "That is not my question. Did you ever say the words, 'Claire, I do not want to have children'?" "Not in those exact words, no." "So, rather than have an honest conversation with the woman you claim to love, you chose to secretly pay her doctor to have her sterilized without her knowledge or consent. Is that correct?" His lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him. "I was protecting our marriage," Thomas shouted, his composure finally shattering. "She was obsessed. The baby talk, the websites, the names. It was all she ever talked about. She would have ruined everything we'd built. Our careers, our lifestyle. She was going to trap me." The court reporter's fingers flew across the keyboard, capturing every self-incriminating word. Sarah paused, letting his outburst hang in the air. "No further questions, Your Honor." The district attorney, buoyed by the mountain of evidence and the public outcry, formally filed criminal charges, felony assault, conspiracy to commit battery, and fraud. Facing decades in prison and the loss of his medical license, Dr. Anders cracked. He took a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to testify against Thomas. His testimony was the final nail in Thomas's coffin. On the stand, Dr. Anders detailed every conversation, every planning session. He told the jury how Thomas had approached him, how he'd framed me as hysterical and irrational, and how the $15,000 was a discretion fee to handle the matter quietly. He concluded with the most chilling detail of all. "Mr. Morrison told me," Dr. Anders said, looking directly at the jury, "that his wife was becoming an inconvenient asset. He said, and I quote, 'A baby would make her a permanent liability. I need to neutralize the threat.'" The jury deliberated for less than 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. The day Thomas was sentenced to 10 years in state prison, I didn't go to the courthouse. I didn't need to see it. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like a victory. There was no triumph, only the quiet, aching void of what had been stolen. The aftermath was a strange, disorienting landscape. My story became a national headline, a talking point on morning shows and a case study in medical ethics journals. I was no longer just Claire. I was the woman whose husband sterilized her, a symbol of the ultimate betrayal. I received thousands of emails and letters. Many were from women sharing their own harrowing stories of reproductive coercion, of partners who sabotaged birth control, of doctors who dismissed their pain. Their stories were a chorus of shared trauma, and I felt a responsibility to amplify their voices. I started a blog, a simple platform to share their stories anonymously. It grew into something much bigger, the Autonomy Project, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to fighting for patient rights and providing legal resources for victims of medical and domestic abuse. The hospital, facing a PR nightmare and a mountain of irrefutable evidence in our class action suit, settled for a sum I am legally not allowed to disclose. It was enough money to ensure I would never have to work again, and more importantly, enough to fund the Autonomy Project for decades to come. I donated half of my personal settlement to organizations that support women's health. It wasn't about the money, it was about forcing them to pay, to assign a value to the choices they had stolen. Dr. Anders was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security prison, and his medical license was permanently revoked. Thomas's firm fired him and, in the wake of his conviction, launched its own investigation, uncovering a history of predatory behavior towards female colleagues. Several more lawsuits followed, obliterating what was left of his professional life. But justice is not the same as healing. The trauma had left its mark, an invisible scar tissue that tightened at unexpected moments. A routine dental appointment would send me into a full-blown panic attack, terrified of being unconscious and vulnerable again. I insisted on having Julie with me for any medical procedure, no matter how minor. I read every word of every form, my pen hovering over the signature line with profound distrust. "It's post-traumatic stress," my therapist, Dr. Martinez, told me gently. "Your body remembers the violation. You have to teach it that it's safe again." The grief came in waves. One day, I was in a department store and wandered into the baby section by mistake. The sight of tiny shoes and soft blankets hit me like a physical blow. I collapsed against a display of onesies, sobbing for the children I would never carry, for the phantom kicks I would never feel, for the fundamental biological choice that had been carved out of me. A kind store employee led me to a back room and sat with me until Julie arrived. "I don't know for sure if I would have had kids," I told Dr. Martinez later, "but he stole my maybe. He stole my right to decide." A year after his sentencing, a letter arrived from the prison. Thomas's familiar, arrogant script on the envelope made my stomach turn. It wasn't an apology. It was a 12-page manifesto of self-pity and justification, detailing his own fears and insecurities, painting himself as the tragic hero of a story in which I was a mere plot device. He wrote that he had acted out of a misguided love, and that he hoped, when he was released, we could find a way to rebuild. I burned the letter in my kitchen sink and called the warden's office to have my name permanently added to his no-contact list. Then Amanda, his mistress, contacted me through Sarah. She wanted to meet. Against everyone's advice, I agreed. She looked gaunt and haunted. She told me that after I left, Thomas had become controlling and paranoid with her. He'd installed tracking software on her phone and accused her of cheating. "I didn't know what he was planning to do to you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I swear, I didn't know it was that. I was selfish and awful, but I never would have—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She handed me a flash drive. "These are texts he sent me beforehand, talking about needing to solve the Claire problem. I thought he meant divorce. I want you to have them. I want him to pay for everything." I took the drive. Her betrayal was a piece of the story, but her testimony added yet another layer to the proof of his premeditation. I walked away without saying a word. Her pain was not my concern. 3 years after the surgery, I moved out of Chicago. I bought a small house on the coast of Oregon, a place where the air smelled of salt and pine, not old betrayals. The sound of the ocean waves became the new rhythm of my life. I still worked as an editor, but on my own terms, choosing projects that resonated with me. My life was quiet, solitary, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like my own. The Autonomy Project flourished under Julie's fierce leadership back in Chicago. Our biggest victory came when Illinois passed Claire's Law, a piece of legislation I had personally lobbied for, which criminalized the forgery of medical consent forms and mandated video-recorded consent for all elective sterilization procedures. 2 other states followed suit within the year. It wasn't a cure, but it was a shield for other women. I started dating again, cautiously. His name was Marcus, a local bookstore owner and a widower. He understood grief and the slow, painstaking work of rebuilding a life from ruins. When I told him my story, he didn't flinch. He just listened, his eyes full of a quiet empathy that asked for nothing in return. And 2 years ago, I became a mother, not in the way I had once planned, but in a way that felt even more profound. I adopted a little girl from the foster care system, a fierce, funny 7-year-old named Maya, with eyes that had seen too much. She had trust issues and a fiery temper that reminded me of my own. We were a perfect match. The other day, we were walking on the beach, and she slipped her small hand into mine. "You chose me," she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "Yes, I did," I said, my throat tight with emotion. "Every single day, I choose you." Choice. The word that had been stolen from me now defined my world. Thomas tried to write the ending of my story, to trap me in a narrative of his own design. But he failed. He assumed my story was about becoming a mother. He was wrong. My story was about becoming myself. The scars on my abdomen have faded to silvery lines, a permanent map of where I've been. They don't hurt anymore. They're just a reminder that survival is its own form of victory, and that the best revenge is not just living well, but living a life that is, finally and completely, your own. What would you do if the person you trusted most conspired to steal your future while you slept? Would you have the strength to fight back? Or would the betrayal break you completely? If Claire's story of survival and justice moved you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of women who refuse to be silenced.